Right. Hello, I am from the MGT Institute for Consciousness, and I would like to talk to you about a subject which has to do with consciousness, and that is the subject of identification. So identification means identity is something that's the same. Alright, now our basic textbook, which is Multi-Genius Technology for Consciousness Volume 1, the Self-Explorer's Handbook, explains the basic philosophy we are using. Identification plays a key role in that, and I will explain you how this works. We have 4 consciousness exploration routes, and these routes are pathways, are approaches, are systematic series of processes or steps in order to reach a particular consciousness level or result. Let me just sum up what these 4 routes consist of. The first one is the exploring the self route. The second one is transcending the self route. The third one is integrating the selves, and the fourth is resolving the self. So you'll see from this the naming of these 4 routes that they all concern the self. Now that's where identification comes in. Let me first define what we mean by the self. The self is the identification of consciousness, which is unlimited, basically. The identification, the limitation, and the being the same as a particular thing. So identification is, I can identify myself with this body. I can identify myself with as a member of a particular group. So that means I am a body, or I am a human, or I am a Dutchman, or I am an Austrian, and identification is basically saying I am. Alright, now that's an interesting subject, because once you have said I am that, it's pretty conclusive. That means you're it. And once you're it, then you may be tempted to believe that you're stuck with it. And if you really identified with something, they say I am a body, or I am a brain, or I am this or that, you may tend to forget the higher level truth that you are actually consciousness. And consciousness is not identified. Consciousness is free. Consciousness is unlimited potential. And consciousness limits itself. Now, when I talked about the Self-Explorer's Handbook, what we offer in the MGT Institute for Consciousness is techniques, technology, ways and means in order to find out where the identification creates problems, where you get stuck with your attention and where you cannot find a way out. And the only thing, and I just want to get straight to the point, the secret, what we need to understand in order to be free beings, in order to fully revitalize or regain the power of consciousness, is to realize that we are identifying. We are not identified. Identified is fixed. It's I am that. Finished. It's static. It's done. And identifying is a process. Now, I mean, psychologists have said that as well. Look at the ego or the I or the self. What is the self? You cannot fix it. It's a process. That's the more recent realization among scientists also, that it's not a static thing. It attempts to be fixed, but it isn't. It's continually in evolution, in movement. Okay, so what we are targeting our procedures, our technology for, is to get a grip on how do we identify and how can we unidentify. If you have the power to identify or not to identify, you're free. You can assume any beingness. You can be what you want. Okay, so that's, very briefly, that is the target that we are going for at MCT for consciousness. And the 4 routes which I mentioned before, exploring the self, you could say, is exploring the limitations. That's what we are identified with. Get familiar with it. Find out where you limit yourself. Because the moment you know where you are limiting yourself and you become conscious of that, of course that opens immediately the way to unidentify and to become conscious of the wider potential that you possess. That's where you go into the higher dimensions of reality, which go way beyond the three-dimensional world of the senses, of what you can see and hear, and goes into inner space. Okay, so that's route number 1, exploring the self. The next route is called transcending the self. Of course, we have to transcend the limitations of the self, the limitations of being identified, of I am that. No, you have to realize that potentially you can be that and that and that and that. And that gives you real freedom. So you have to know how to do that. We teach you procedures, and this may not be the only way to do it, because there's many geniuses that have pointed in this direction, of course. But we have a way and a proven technology to get there. So that's transcending the self. Now, the next thing, of course, comes up is all these different selves. We are not alone. People talk about, service to self or service to others. And they say the real ego people, they're concentrated and limited to service to self. And everything gets interpreted to help themselves, the ego, to get rich, etc., etc. Now, let's say on this level, on integrating the selves, we are talking about now a being who is already unidentified, is a free conscious spiritual being who now can talk to, but not only that, can be the others. And there is a difference between communicating with others, having the distance, or sharing or being the others. So we teach a way to become aware of the truth. On the higher, on the multidimensional level, we are the others. That's the root of integrating the selves. That gives a lot of understanding and a lot of freedom. And then finally, resolving, the 4th route is resolving the self, where the self will find its proper place. Resolving it means the self will no longer be a problem. There is the freedom to be and the freedom not to be. And that's the answer. In Shakespeare's term said, to be or not to be, we say to be and not to be is the answer. Thank you very much for listening.